just going to introduce everybody. So we've got Holly, who you can see in a lovely tie-dye, who is a wonderful designer with a focus on textiles as well, and is part of the fantastic voluntary organisation which is the Emergency Designer Network, which Fashion Roundtable, where we were on lots of calls at the beginning of what feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only a few months ago, and they've been working on making scrubs for NHS workers. We've got Belle Jacobs, who many of you will know as a writer and a climate change activist, and has been part of the XR Boycott Fashion core team. I would say leadership, but it doesn't have a leadership because it's a collective, so I'm sure that will be a very interesting conversation. We have Francesco Mazzarella, is that correct? Who is a research fellow at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. We worked on an event that he hosted in Waltham Forest about Brexit, which was interestingly anarchical, and he can explain a bit more about what he's been doing and why Waltham Forest and areas like that of London, I think, are very important to include in these conversations, because all too often they're left out. And Bethany, when she turns up, will be a vision, no doubt, of blonde hair and big smiles, and she is very well known as the recent, there she is, she's coming in, there's Bethany, she's in the room. Hi Bethany, and she can speak in a minute, and she's just recently won an award, the Queen Elizabeth Award for British Design. Is that the right name, Bethany? Yeah. And she also, alongside Holly, is part of the Emergency Designer Network. Hi, love the fridge. So I want to just start with Belle, if that's okay. If you could just explain, obviously the XR movement has gained a lot of understandable press. All of us, I think, on this call have shared a sense of activism in whatever ways we have, and yet all of us are interestingly aligned with the fashion industry. So there's an interesting kind of layering. For me, it's very much around policy and activism to create policy change, and for other people it takes its forms in different ways. So I'm just going to mute myself after I've introduced Belle, and if everybody else who's coming on could just stay muted, that would be great. And Belle, if you could just explain what you do and what the work of XR and the work you've been doing around fashion is, that would be great. Thank you.
Oh, okay, well, I think I'll try and do it fairly quickly. I used to be a fashion editor, as some of you may know, on Metro newspaper, and during that time I think I participated fully in the culture of fashion. I think it's wise to say I didn't question where my clothes had come from, or the clothes that I was writing about, you know, where they were coming from. I went to the fashion shows, you know, there was always a fashion party. I think the growing unease came, I mean, I always thought I'd cared about the planet, about people, about animals, but I sort of thought, well, fashion, you know, is so fun, it's so harmless, it's just this great thing. The turning point, the unease came from just the sheer quantity of material I was starting to get. So I would just get so many press releases of people pushing product onto the page. And then obviously the turning point for me, as it was for many other people, was Rana Plaza. And I think that's when the whole of the fashion industry started asking real questions about where the clothing was coming from. And at that point, most of us responded, most of us in the fashion media responded by writing about ethical labels, because we thought if you present the consumer with the alternative, they will make the right choice. Since sort of 2016, we're getting more and more, we've been getting more and more bad news about the climate. After finding out what garment workers were enduring, we started to realize that the fashion industry itself has this huge impact on the climate emergency. And it was enough to make me feel very, very uncomfortable. And promoting ethical fashion just didn't seem enough. We were just constantly going down this slide towards, as far as I could tell, annihilation. So when Extinction Rebellion popped up at the end of 2018, it was a breath of fresh air. I felt that finally here was a movement that was confronting the fact that we were in a climate emergency head on and taking to the streets. Taking to the streets was not a natural place for me. I mean, I'd been on a couple of protest marches as a student, but I genuinely think that things had got to that stage where I needed to be out and to find a community that understood things in the same way that I did. Since 2018, I don't think the news has got any better. In fact, it's getting markedly worse, and coronavirus has opened up some opportunities which with the impetus for economic growth, we are rapidly shutting down again. So with Extinction Rebellion, we started off with a boycott fashion, which was, we were trying to ask people to stop buying all new fashion and textiles for a year. And that was launched, gosh, I think early 2019. And then we followed that with the Cancel London Fashion Week campaign. And both of them, you know, attracted, you know, were difficult campaigns to push forward, because essentially all of us within the group, all who had come from industry, felt that we were alienating many people that we'd worked with before. You know, to tell designers that you love that really we all have to stop buying their products is quite a big thing. And then the London Fashion Week campaign again attracted a lot of resistance. What I am pleased to say, it's a qualified pleasure because we're still going on this downward slope. What I'm pleased to say is there is a movement coming around to understand that we can't keep consuming new, no matter how you word it, whether it's a boycott or make do and mend, which is essentially the same philosophy. It is this understanding that we can't keep consuming. And then the Cancel Fashion Week, again, it's been accelerated by the coronavirus or not, who knows? There's now some talk amongst luxury French fashion brands that they wish to continue with the physical spectacle. But that was very much highlighting the role of the Fashion Week as this platform for celebrating fashion as a mode of consumption, and also celebrating the idea of the new, that we have to keep changing seasonally by season. I find myself often also talking about what it's like to be an activist, fronting or being part of campaigns which are quite unpopular, at least at the beginning. It's an uncomfortable space to inhabit. We are very, very reinforced by our knowledge that the planet is in a dangerous situation. It's difficult to overemphasize that. We're here on a bizarrely hot day once again. So yeah, it's been quite a ride, I would say.
I mean, perhaps for Bethany and Holly, the dialogue around launching a PPE campaign hasn't had any negativity, because it's something that's so obviously needed. But my experience of running any campaign or anything that pushes buttons is inevitably you're going to deal with the opposite point of view and the negativity. So how do you think you countered that? Both because I did feel when we had a meeting for the all-party parliamentary group and we met with you, I was actually really concerned that, you know, it's a very difficult conversation to have, and the support that's needed to be able to deal with that emotionally and intellectually is a lot of resilience. It needs a lot of resilience to be able to consistently, day in, day out, push a conversation which is about something that's beyond human comprehension easily. It's it's very difficult, and I actually really worried for the people in the campaign. So how do you deal with that, do you think? Because you do, to run any campaign, you need to be resilient, and you need to look at the bigger picture, and you need to understand that people will come round, because if you're used to pushing agendas, even if that's as a creative, then you understand that the flip is eventually people will come around to your way of thinking, right? But how do you deal with that emotionally when it's such a devastating topic, is my question. How do you think? Yeah, how would you deal with that? Or how did you deal with running XR and being in the face of all that criticism?
I see. Sorry, I didn't realize you were asking me.
Yeah.
I think I got the impression very much that I was reading different news stories from other people and getting a real sense of the emergency and the incredible loss that we were facing as a human race. I have, for some reason, I don't know how to describe it, I find the idea of suffering appalling. And it genuinely, I think in all my work, you know, I've been a child counsellor, I work in animal rights, and you know, I'm now this climate activist. In all my work, it's the idea that there will be immense suffering. if we don't try and tackle things. And then I speak as a mum. I want my daughter, when she's 60, to live in a secure world. And, you know, even yesterday, the Committee on Climate Change are now saying perhaps we should be preparing for a 4 degrees rise in temperature. So we are now talking about millions of people dying and really, really unstable environments in which there may be, you know, I don't want to sound too apocalyptic, but in order to sort of communicate the urgency of the situation, you have to use the Extinction Rebellion terminology, tell the truth. So holding all of this in mind, and you know, it's laced with the most profound grief, gave me the strength. You know, I suppose the most challenging forum that I had to sit in was at the BFC, when they put me on a panel with Arizona News. And
that's my son's school, because I've complained about the 14-minute Zoom call that they gave him after 4 months. I'm sorry about that.
No, don't worry. So they put me on this panel in the British Fashion Council at London Fashion Week, and I remember, again, not so much thinking everyone's out to get me, but just thinking this is an opportunity to really communicate to people who have an influence. And in fact, the reality is that everyone is more or less on board. You know, I'm not really, and particularly in this audience, saying anything that people don't know. Mm. Where it actually weirdly gets a lot harder is out on the streets. There isn't a single action I've done where someone hasn't shot negative remarks at you. And I've been called all sorts of things for simply, as far as I can tell, asking everyone to just slow down with the consumption, reconnect with the people who make our clothes, reconnect with the nature from which our clothes come from. And so when I frame it like that, I can't see that I'm doing anything wrong, certainly not enough to be called, you know, some of the things that I've been called. And so over time, I'm starting to see a lot of resistance is fear. And the most recent action I went on was in front of Topshop on Saturday, where we were making a mending to try and show people that you don't have to buy from Topshop, you can actually make your own stuff. And this woman with this little Selfridges bag, she'd obviously come from Selfridges, and she wanted to go into Topshop, and we were slightly in her way, and she looked utterly furious. And I remember looking at her thinking, you don't look like a nasty person, you look like a person who just doesn't know. And if I could just talk to you and say what I'm so frightened of, you know, maybe I could you just don't know. There's a lot of, you know, one thing when I was thinking about today's event, I was thinking, well, we've got legislature here through Fashion Roundtable, we've got representation from academia through Francesco, we've got the designers here, but now we need to talk to the consumers. We need a consumer representative who kind of goes, but why can't I? You know, we need to reach out of our bubbles, because they're the ones driving this. So yes, it has been really challenging, but I'm slightly getting to the position where I think it's just...
You're building the resilience.
I really am. I really am. Yeah. I'm not saying that when someone calls me a stupid idiot on the street, I don't kind of go, oh God. But it's more like, I'm building the resilience, because you have to.
So when we did the Fabian women's training, which is what in part led me here, well, mostly I would say, because that was my journey into Parliament, we have resilience training. And I think it's crucial to anybody standing up, because if you're part of any political party, is door knocking. And I have to say, I haven't done it in a while, but I have done it quite a lot. And you do feel like you're a Jehovah's Witness pushing religion on people, but you know, when I've done it to support people for election who I believe in, or I did phone banking, and I did door knocking back for the Brexit referendum a lot, and for me it was so crucial to me, or I believe in the person that I'm helping, and then I try to keep the conversation to the areas that I can speak about, which would be I don't know, childcare or NHS usage or nursery provision or whatever it might be, their own personal experiences, so that I can keep it simple, because otherwise, with the library campaign, I made sure that it cut through to the communities that are reliant on it, who are generally those who won't speak up. So there's an elderly, there's a place for the elderly over the road, there's council that they're trying to get rid of as well, and it was all linked. There are communities from Wood Green who are going there because it's a place of peace. It takes them 2 buses. So I tried to engage, but I think it can be very tough. And that was what I saw when we had those meetings. I was like, I think this is it's the toughest conversation you're going to have, isn't it? It's about the end of the world. And, you know, it's devastating, and it's very hard for to intellectually and physically deal with, and it was something I wanted to cover. You've also sent some links, which I know Sarah's going to send, because we've been picking up on the brands that haven't been paying. We actually had someone who tried to say that this was wrong, because we shared some information yesterday, and I've said that they need to revert. There's an organisation in Washington that we got the data from, so we've asked them to go to them if they have an issue with it. But you shared some links because there's obviously been a rise either in non-payment. So how do we find that balance between non-payment for workers who need to be paid to survive economically and the conversation about the climate? This is that's a tough circle to square, isn't it?
It's really tough. I actually spoke to a woman, and it was a profound conversation for me, called Nandita Shivakumar from Asian Floor Wage Alliance. And I said to her, what can we do? She wasn't particularly keen on boycott, so I will absolutely put that out on the table straight away. Her request was that if there was some way we could find to raise wages, but slow down the pace of production. She said at the moment, the West seemed to be constantly demanding clothing. Was there a chance that we could, you know, just reduce to 6 to 8 collections a year, as opposed to however many there are, and then pay them properly for those collections? The other thing that she brought up, I mean, she talked about the suffering that the garment workers are undergoing right now, and it's really profound again. I mean, lives are being lost, homes are being lost. You know, you don't need to watch many films to see small children are suffering because of this. It's insane. But the other thing that she pointed out is, if they could spend less time making clothes for the West, they could spend more time in building resilience amongst their own communities. So they could start reinvesting in education, maybe in health services, and in preparing for the effects of the climate emergency, which countries like Bangladesh are going to feel are already undergoing. You know, is there a chance where we make the space for people in the global South to work to protect their own lands, their own communities, create their own industries that serve each other, rather than serving the rich North, who so undervalue what they make anyway? We are now talking about systemic transformation on a massive scale. You know, who's going to pay for these resilience projects?
Well, especially now that DFID's been merged with the Foreign Office.
Exactly.
DFID is the Department for International Development. I think it's a very worrying direction of travel for what the UK wants to do to support other countries.
I genuinely agree. Yeah, it's very disturbing.
So, I mean, that's because we've heard through the work we do for the Ethics and Sustainability in Fashion, APPG, that with the non-payments, the consequences have been that girls have been trafficked out of factories or sold into marriages. We heard of one girl who's committed suicide as a consequence of forced marriage. So these issues are endemic in the consequences of what we're choosing to purchase, and supporting brands who now in this crisis are choosing not to pay their workers. And for me, that's where the ultimate heartbreak lies about all of this story. Maybe because it's the more immediate, I don't know, but for me this is where the heartbreak lies, and it's something we're going to be covering. So I'm definitely going to be picking your brains for the Ethics and Sustainability APPG, because we're doing a report on this and we will be doing our first evidence session. And if anyone's got questions, we'll come back to Belle after. But I just want to pull in now, if that's okay, Holly and Bethany, who will probably speak in conjunction. I'm not sure how we'll work it. We had a first question for you guys from Fiona. Does activism around PPE open routes for wider acceptance of sustainable behaviour refashion? Which I think is interesting, because I think it goes to the heart of the usable and reusable and the onshoring conversations. So I wonder what you guys think about that, Holly and Bethany.
Yeah, I'll go first.
Yeah.
It was kind of core part of our kind of agenda, if you like, that whilst what we were doing was kind of quite reactive to the situation, that we were also kind of thinking of as a sort of longer term legacy of something that would hopefully answer some of these questions around about sustainability. Obviously, the sort of large proportion of PPE is disposable, which to us seemed quite astonishing, and we kind of quickly discovered that there was no UK standard, there was no kind of acceptable level across the nation, which we kind of just, I suppose we kind of blindly went into it thinking there would be a specification that suited all the trusts and all the organisations, but we quickly realised there wasn't this imposition, and then the kind of greater implications that would have in terms of trusts and organisations' responsibility vis-a-vis sustainability was also kind of quite a highlight for us too. So our kind of mission was to, yes, address the immediate issue. So we opted to kind of make scrubs because they are something that is reusable within the chain. And within the kind of network of designers that we established, that was something that we could do in a technically correct way, if you like, but also using some of the funding that we'd managed to kind of accrue to look at reusable gowns, which we've been trialling and have now purchased quite a substantial amount of a new fabric that's been created to put that into production, hopefully working with the Royal Free Hospital to kind of give some of the organisations in the UK longer term solutions to just make them actually consider what they're kind of bringing into the equation, and very much kind of centred around UK manufacture, because we felt obviously there's a huge disconnect between the fact that everything's being imported and nothing is made on home ground, if you like, which is partly why the sort of problem was so immense when it arose. And they didn't have those kind of facilities like myself, Phoebe and Bethany, who are all part of the Emergency Designer Network, all manufacture in the UK, so we can be quite kind of quick, and you can be much more reactive and much more agile in these kind of situations. So hopefully our longer term aim is that there will be some appreciation of that, and hopefully some distillation of the kind of network of manufacturers, fabrications, etc., that we've set up into the chain of command. Whether that will happen via government and the NHS is another matter, but at least if we're liaising directly with hospital trusts, so having that kind of primary point of contact, we can have more frank and quicker discussions with them to hopefully see some of this disseminate into the chain.
And before I come to Bethany, what because obviously, as you know, I worked on this a lot for 2.5 months with you and also with Kate from Make It British, and it was a lot of work, and you went straight to the trusts, whereas we worked with government and with the Cabinet Office. How, my sense is that also enabled a quicker turnaround. How have you found that, and do you think that will be long term? But also, all of you have volunteered. So what can we get towards system change where people start realising that they need to pay for all this voluntary service that you're kindly donating?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, we spent a sort of a good few weeks with you in discussion. Kind of realised ultimately that we weren't able to be productive in the sense that we were kind of keen to utilise goodwill that was coming from brands and designers, and kind of as much to create the product as also to kind of help the sort of sense of positivity within the designer community and the fashion industry within the UK. There was a sort of offshoot benefit that we hadn't maybe anticipated of in a sort of mental health capacity, and that it gave people something proactive and something tangible to actually contribute to, which I think we would probably like to incorporate as a longer term aspect of what we do with the Emergency Designer Network. It's, as you say, everyone's been working on a voluntary basis, but we're now kind of adjusting that so that we're paying for manufacturing.
Right.
We're using all UK textile suppliers, all UK manufacturing, so that everything's sourced on home ground to try and keep the carbon footprint as small as possible, and cutting as cleverly as we can to kind of try and reduce waste, etc., etc. There's still a lot of work.
Yeah, because with PPE, the issue has been, well, there's been many issues, but one of the issues has been that it's only been one fabric textiles manufacturer, which is Don and Low in Scotland, that have produced the fabric. And I was cross-checking with the Cabinet because they were talking about the order that they had, but I knew from the SNP that the Scottish order for NHS Scotland had already been confirmed because it was a much more streamlined service because they didn't have consultants, whereas here's had consultants. I'm still waiting for an update from the Cabinet Office on the latest PPE developments. I've also sat in on some calls from Scientists for Labour about PPE, about the lack of, it doesn't fit different body types, so the gowns aren't fitting women, and this is what I said, Southeast Asian women can't wear the masks because but there were reasons which I think I've shared it in our newsletter recently, which also escalate the issues of BAME mortality, which is also why I remember I had chats with Cosette about what you named it, because I'm just so worried about legal ramifications, because you've all done this from a good intention. Bethany, you're so core to kind of like new gen, for me anyway, the new gen conversation around sustainability. And I remember one of my first ever conversations that we hosted back when we just launched, and you came and you were going off to your bar job. It's before you won the award, do you remember?
Yeah.
Talking about how you were working with the Vauxhall Food Bank, and then you've worked with the Women's Refuge in Liverpool. And I still can't, I think it's so commendable that you've consistently brought that into your business values, because it's like a Quakers kind of response to it. It's very soul driven, and fashion traditionally isn't like that. It's traditionally, you know, this kind of like pumped up, high powered, terrifying world. And yet all of, you know, my connection with it was never that. It was never, I didn't really like that bit of the job. I liked the connecting and the stories. But where does this come from? Is it your mum? Is it you? Have you always been active in activism?
Big question. Yeah, I think, I don't know, like I obviously have done that kind of work growing up, like social side of things, and then was working in like the arts and fashion, and just found it really problematic. Like just for me, yeah, with fashion, like I'm like a designer, I love textiles, I love making, and I love recycling, but yeah, I found the idea of fashion for me like quite problematic. Just, I don't know, the idea of waste, like that, you know, because we spend most of our time within like the social spaces and the social manufacturing units and that kind of side of things, rather than like the fashion side of things. But I think it's just because, yeah, like I love working with people, and yeah, I love working the social projects that we work with. It's just really amazing to see how transformative they are. And you know, like I just think like fashion should be used as a tool like for social reform, and I think it has a really massive voice and ability to like amplify ideas to a larger audience that other industries don't. Yeah, so I think like so I think you can talk to so many more people via using it as a tool.
So when you were at university, was this part of the conversation at university or with your peers? Was it coming from the academics? Where was it coming from?
Yeah, so I like did fine art at uni. I didn't do fashion, but I was working at a garage magazine in London at the same time, but more on like the arts side of things, like art direction and like organizing projects, which was really amazing, because we would put like artists and design houses together, and they'd make like really interesting projects that would be kind of sitting within the arts world. And it was all kind of through like collaboration, and how like collaboration, you know, brings these like unexpected outcomes.
I did a lot of shoots with art photographers, and it's fascinating. I mean, the egos were next level, I have to say. I was very quick. Yeah. Very slow, but yeah, I found it interesting because you're opening up. So you've always been open to like cross fertilization.
Yeah. And then I did like critical fine art practice, so it's kind of about fine art theory, and I was kind of looking into like, does art or like artistic projects have the ability to cause a political effect outside of themselves? And so I was kind of looking at projects such as like Superflex, who are like massive art collectives that kind of use government bodies or infiltrate multinational companies and kind of take their funding and put it into community projects through their practice. So they kind of become like a system, and they're kind of like create systematic change, but like they use things as tools basically. So I was just like looking at how like a fashion brand could be able to use things as tools to create social change.
And both you and Holly, and Phoebe as well, with her atelier in London, have decided to manufacture, both of you in the UK. it's super geeky what we've been doing on the visa list. The deadline was the 24th, I think, which was quite coincidental because wasn't that the date of the Brexit vote 4 years ago? But it was to try to get workers onto that list. How challenging is that, and what would you like to both see in terms of like supporting manufacturing, both you, Bethany, and you, Holly, in terms of like being able to build that? Because I think that's been core to the conversation that I was trying to drive with PPE.
Yeah, I think for me, I feel like fashion employs like 1 in 6 people on the planet, like, you know, from agriculture to PR. So I feel like it should be taken so much more seriously in the UK, and it brings so much more income into the UK. And yet when we were having these conversations around PPE, I just felt like it wasn't being taken serious, and no one thought that we would be able to produce what we have in the time that we've been given. And under also lockdown, you know, like how many units like the whole organization has turned out as 115 manufacturers. So I just feel like I just felt like we should have a bit more power and be taken a bit more seriously in helping and supporting makers in the UK. I
mean, would you like to see government targets that a brand has to try to commit to?
Yeah, well, I just think it's super important, and I think the whole COVID crisis has shown us that we can't rely upon other borders that are going to be shut. Mm-hmm. So, like, I think like what we were trying to say is like there's so many makers and so many people within the UK, so many talent, so much craft. Like it just needs to be invested in and taken serious.
Mm. Yeah, Holly, why have you always manufactured in the UK?
We about, it was 2016, we sort of took a conscious decision to stop making anything overseas. We used to do a lot of work with embellishment in India, etc. And it just didn't sit comfortably with me. You know, the garments were infinitely better traveling for me before they'd been kind of made up, and it just felt the antithesis of what I felt like I should be doing as a person. So to kind of bring it back home, if you like, made sense. And plus, to work collaboratively has always been a huge part of my practice. So it's much nicer for me to be able to go to the factories, to build those relationships with manufacturers. You know, we get a better end result. It's, you know, it's a more interesting way. I learn something from it as well, and my team can kind of broaden their expertise. So it just, in a holistic sense, is just a nicer way to work if you can do it. There is challenges in terms of the costs, and obviously the consumer and the buyer's perception of your product is then changed because it is more expensive to make it here.
In terms of price, what kind of margin do you think it adds?
It can be quite astonishing. We had one dress, for example, that we made, not a particularly complex piece that we made in London, and that was coming in it was about kind of £90 to manufacture here. In Portugal, it was 20. So it's, you know, that's a big difference in terms of the margin. Not necessarily for more simplistic styles, but for sort of more complex things, it has quite a big sort of knock-on effect. And it's whether it's having that discussion with your market and your customer, if they're willing to kind of take that leap of faith and appreciate that there is a sort of better chain of supply behind what you've produced, and you know, buy into that story in a sense, and invest in your brand in that way. So it really changed our output. But I think, again, through working on the PPE, it's just highlighted to me, as Bethany's saying, the sort of level of craftsmanship and artisans that are in the UK. Once, you know, I thought it would be quite a compromise to my work because it's quite kind of maximal what I do, to sort of have to work within those confines. But I think it actually heightens creativity. It shows you new avenues, and you as a sort of designer have a responsibility to rise to that challenge and do it within a kind of framework that is conscious and conscientious for the environment.
Yeah, I think for me, I learned a lot actually also through engaging on a daily basis with Kate Hills from Make It British. I was going to speak on one of her panels before the lockdown for her expo, and I think what she's doing is phenomenal, I have to say, in supporting British design and suppliers and manufacturers. And you know, she's been like a one-woman show on this, and it's quite phenomenal what she knows and the networks that she's and you know, and unlike all of us, she's pushing the living wage, and you know, and the thing is, so £90, let's just break down the maths, £90 at cost, what does that take to go to retail? 250, is that at retail, or how does that work out?
It would be a 2.7
Yeah.
On that.
So what would that be? 400, 300? I'm not very good at maths. What would it be?
That's around that, yeah.
Okay, so then it's about how you communicate. So then it becomes marketing, doesn't it? It becomes about creating authentic stories which actually push an advocacy. And I don't think that's going to be something that's going to diminish. Having seen how active my son, who's 9, and his generation are, they definitely want to know the story of things much more, because they're literate in different ways than other generations have been. I think they're more aware, and they want to be more aware. And something that Jodie, who's just messaged, in another life she made swimwear in Mauritius, and was explaining to me what that was like yesterday on the phone. But she's working on a traffic light system, and we will cover that in another webinar very soon. But I think it's very interesting, because it just means that it can become, I don't like to use this word, but almost idiot proof, so that me and Juki can go to the shops and we can know green means it's okay, amber once every year, red don't touch it. And I think that's the problem, is we don't know. And what we want to build into is as to me is obvious around the PPE conversation about what you both are doing, is that people are paid fairly. And if somebody has to go about buying it, that's all to the good, because we've been buying like this, and it's making everyone feel sick, and it's escalating into the issues that Belle's just been covering. Have you seen a drop in like, obviously COVID notwithstanding, but did you see a different engagement? Did you have to explain it more to your sales agent and your buyers, how so that they could understand your reasons?
Yeah, I think there was a sort of, we had to, as a brand, felt a responsibility to educate our buyers, and it was about what we were doing, and explain any change in sort of pricing infrastructure, or just sort of outline what our intent was, because it wasn't going to change. That was what we'd done as our direction, and that was going to be it. And I think a lot of people are incredibly receptive to it. There's still, internationally, there's still quite a large association with British manufacturing being of a really high calibre, which I think is not appreciated here. They associate it with being well made and with a premium product. So from that point of view, particularly with our Asian clientele, there was a real sense of, oh, well, this is, it's a benchmark. It's going to be, it's going to be easily good enough for us if it's done in this way. As you say, I think a lot of the problem lies with kind of education within the UK about that kind of infrastructure. Even with the graduates that are coming into the industry, I kind of, I'm quite mortified by how many people are kind of streaming into it without a sort of solid awareness of that, or thinking about different ways to tackle industry and to innovate within that. As we saw through the PP discussion, there was a huge amount of British manufacturing that wanted to become involved but weren't able to because of the red tape and the barriers, and that was a huge source of frustration. So it's how to kind of, I guess, when we split away from that, we could connect the dots much more quickly. I think because we are designers, we're used to working quite reactively, and right or wrong, if you're working to a fashion show, things do happen really quickly, and there is quite a lot of sort of pressure around that. So you're used to utilising a lot of different skills, other than design, within that kind of remit, which put us in quite a good position to actually tackle this. As Bethany rightly said, I think people were kind of surprised that we'd actually managed to do anything. And I think having more of a sort of awareness of what can be achieved collectively as an industry is incredibly important moving forwards.
Yeah, I mean, the red tape issue was next level. If for anyone on the call, they kept changing the civil servants that I was speaking to. It was almost on a weekly basis. There is now one head of the team at cabinet level who's been brought in, and she's running it. As I've said, I'm still waiting for an update, which I haven't had in 2 weeks. I did ask 2 weeks ago. But they do change a lot, so you have to consistently try to engage with them. But any conversation that anybody, or emails that anyone's got that they want to send in to us, we can share them with the relevant departments. And we've shared the links for the community, which is brilliant. Obviously, in a hot summer's day, I'm dying to buy a jumper, so I've not got a moth problem at all. But yeah, I'm sure lots of other people want to buy a jumper. And also the donate, which we always share in our newsletter and have done since you launched. And if you've got any questions for Holly and Bethany, please put them into the chat, and I'll come on to Francesco and we can talk about my favourite subject, which is the gift that keeps on giving, which is Brexit, and then onto your other work. So Francesco, obviously, I'm guessing, are you Brazilian or Italian? You're Italian, right?
Yes, Italian.
Italian. So because my ex-assistant was Italian, Brazilian, so I didn't want to assume. So how has the journey, and how many years have you lived here?
5, actually.
5.
Yeah.
Oh, so you came just before.
Yeah, I moved to the UK in September 2014, so actually almost 6 in September.
Right. Have you seen a kind of shift in the conversation around the Brexit conversation, and people's engagement with you? Have you seen much about that at all, or do you feel because you live in London, it's not quite so?
No, yeah, but actually I moved to the UK to do my PhD at Loughborough University, and I've lived in Loughborough and in Nottingham before moving to London. I've only been 2 years in London, actually.
Right.
So, and of course, living outside of London, you face the reality of Brexit much, much harder. I remember, and so in 2016, I was living in Nottingham, and I get to remove so many people from my social media because I couldn't stand them anymore, the racism and all this claims and injustice and not acceptance. So whereas in the UK, in London, we don't really realize that because there is so much diversity and we are all valued for what we are. In other parts of the country, absolutely, yes. So it is something that I face myself, and of course, many others like me that live and work here, but they are not from the UK. We felt the vulnerability of what will happen to our future. And as well, I remember even last year went to vote, but then although I registered to vote, I then went to the poll in the school next in my street, but then I was denied the right to vote. I found it very, my name was crossed. So actually as well, you feel really disempowered because you live here, you pay the taxes to this country, and then you don't have the right voice.
So non-UK passport holders are allowed to vote in local elections. I think that's the right, but not in general elections.
Yes, yes.
So were you allowed? Was this a general election or a?
No, it was a local one, and
you've been allowed to vote then. That's not right.
Okay.
I mean, I'll look into it, but I'm pretty sure that that's the situation. So obviously, inevitably, you weren't able to vote on the Brexit referendum. My ex-boyfriend who lives in France, he couldn't vote. My best friend who lives in New York, who's both British passport holders, they both couldn't vote. Definitely for Ben in France, his life is being transformed. He's just got his residency papers through, but he didn't need them before. And that's the thing, the freedom of movement. I mean, the conversations everybody's had about what other passport you can get is like a gold dust conversation at the moment. My husband's just got his Irish, my son's getting one, I can't get one. I'll be queuing, they won't. But what made you do the work you did around Brexit? Because we met when you were doing an event in Waltham Forest, which I also want to come on to. But what made you do these events, and how did you get the college behind it?
Yeah, as well, yes, I must say that, yeah, I also had to face resistance, and then I had to build resilience around it, of course. So it all happened. Waltham Forest was elected the very first London Borough of Culture in 2019. And London College of Fashion, at the moment we have 6 buildings across the city, but we're moving to Stratford in the Olympic Park. Actually, it's been delayed due to the lockdown to September 2023. But because we believe that the university has a civic role, we want to engage with communities and not just be parachuted in East London. So my role was to actually engage with communities in East London before we arrived there and work together with them. So then I had an amazing opportunity to shape a proposal for Making for Change, Waltham Forest. This project I've been leading on with Waltham Forest Council. And as well, it's a great experience to do fashion activism from within a local government. As well, you may imagine all the challenges, but opportunities as well that goes with it. And just at the beginning, the project started in February 2018, and it was in the heat of the Brexit conversation. And as well, the council owned a space which was a Morrison supermarket, and which has been empty for almost 2 years. And as well in the regeneration team, they were thinking about actually they wanted to give this space to me for running the project. And as well, then I also felt uncomfortable with the privilege of being given like 300 square meters of space for myself, whereas I have my office in LCF, in Oxford Circus, and I know how many designers and makers, they actually struggle to get affordable workspaces. Yeah. So I actually had to challenge that to say, I don't need that space for myself, but actually then we worked in consultation, and we then established a fashion hub for fashion designers and makers. So Arbeit Studios, they are managing the space. And at LCF, we have also established Fashion District, which is the vision that sets the vision of East London to be a hub for fashion innovation and sustainability. We do actually though push to have a communal area where we could run cultural activities as art for the environment residencies, exhibitions, symposia, because we felt that especially that area of Waltham Forest, Baker's Arms, didn't have any cultural provision. And also we wanted to have a community space. But going back to your first question as well, at that time we actually participated in the march on the 29th March against Brexit, and we collected lots of messages from the protest, and we felt that we couldn't just and I remember as well when the Borough of Culture in Walthamstow as well was announced for the launch event, there was no mention to the young person in Waltham Forest being stabbed in those days. So I didn't want as well that my project, Making Change Waltham Forest, would start with the celebration of all this, how fashion could also be frivolous, without taking into consideration the social implications of the fashion industry itself. So I then proposed, okay, we are in this time, and already in April they wanted to start the work, the reconstruction of that space. But I said this space also has a history with the community, and as well I was shown around this space, and which was quite apocalyptic. There were all the empty shelves and the fridges with still messages, great offers or meal deal, but there was no deal there. So I'd say this is fantastic to actually think what will happen to the fashion industry when after Brexit, how we are going to trade or make and consume fashion. So we worked together with Artists Collective Foreign Investment, and as well with some amazing students of mine from MA Fashion Futures at LCF. And we did as well, we had like 3 days, and we upcycled pre-consumer fabric waste from a local charity called Forest Recycling Project. And we made this collection of 10 outfits, all yellow and blue with the colors of the European flag, and with all embedded messages that we collected from the march. And so as well, the fashion show, as well, it was a provocation. It was not a fashion show. The models were no models, but they were normal people or performers. And as well, using the cut-up technique, we had taken text related to fashion from to Brexit from the magazines and the newspapers, but then we reverted the messages to actually come up with some responses to Brexit. And then we had a panel debate, and you were one of the panelists, so I'm glad that now we are reverting roles. And we had also John Hood from who is professor at Goldsmiths University. We had Andrew Wagland from Wagland Textiles, who is the oldest fabric manufacturer in London, and then a local artist, Hannah Ford. As well, the setting was, I think, quite creative, because we had the panel sitting by the tills.
We were the cashiers.
Yeah, you were a cashier.
Credit.
Selling your coats instead of goods, and it was a very animated conversation. I think.
Yeah, that's one word for it. I think there was an argument. I think I might have been a part of it.
It was, yes. But yeah, the thing was that as well at that time I was also scoping the project, and I've worked with the business team and working for a council, and it's thinking how we could support local businesses. And most of them, in the initial consultations, most of them were claiming that most of the workers are from European, and they were really insecure about what their industry would respond. So we actually wanted to highlight and discuss the social implications of Brexit on the fashion industry.
Do you think that because my sense is that fashion and the people that are engaged with the sector, being what we all are, we tend to get onto an issue and then move on. And what worries me about Brexit, and in fact all of these conversations, is that people get obsessed about any one of these things and then they move on. But these issues, I mean, Brexit actually still hasn't happened. It's about to happen. But the work we had to do to get people to feed back on a survey so that we could put evidence in to try to promote getting people onto a visa list was quite shocking. I was really surprised, because to me it's so obvious that people need to be aware of it, in the way that Belle explains how obvious it is for her about climate change, and Holly and Bethany explain in a way how transparently obvious it is for them that we need to bring manufacturing to the UK. My son's now coming back. This is going to get very interesting. 1 second. So if you could just answer that, I will tell them to be quiet 1 second.
Okay. Well, actually, yeah, I know there is the issue of moving on, and as well, even the London, as well, even as a researcher, we work on a research project that is funded and it has a timeline. So there is always the issue how to sustain the projects after the funding and the timeline and as well, there was also the tension of like the interest of maybe even moving on to the next borough culture. But you then, as a designer for like design activist, I feel so responsible to my community working for us. So I don't want to move on, not only for in terms of issue, but also responsibility towards people. And I know that as well now all the emphasis is on COVID-19. We don't remember about Brexit anymore. And as well, the climate emergency is also going a bit sideways. So, but they are all connected, and as well, the issues of like the social injustice as well. Climate emergency has implications with climate justice as well, and Brexit. So it is all connected, and I hope that we don't move on. But all the projects, they have a legacy.
Yeah, my personal worry is that any fallout economically from COVID will mask a bad trade deal with the EU, and that therefore we can't hold people to account. Juki, sorry darling, but you... The joys of 4 months, 5 months. Oh, he wants to say hi. Anyway, here he is. I think we have to keep it real nowadays. Yeah, so somebody else is saying they've got a toddler. Yeah, exactly. So here's Juki, who actually aged 4 went out campaigning with me for against Brexit and thought we were going to a party, and I said, no darling, it's for the Labour Party. We've been doing it for an hour. When you had these conversations with UAL and Waltham Forest, did you feel that you were stepping out of the norms of the expectations of what it is to be an academic somewhat? Because I didn't go to fashion college, so I'm not aware of what the kind of conversations were, but certainly at UCL that wasn't really part of what was going on. I mean, it was, let's talk more about a book or a text or something. It wasn't really, because I read English, it wasn't really about these kind of socio issues. How did they take it when you said this?
Yeah, I remember my first meeting at the council, they were asking, what are you researching? And say fashion activism. And of course they were a bit threatened and say, what? But as well, I'm researching also, I'm mapping out also different approaches to activism. And activism is all about activating change, but it could be either from outside of the system, but also within the system. And I think as well, working together with the local government has enabled a lot of change to happen. Of course, slow, but somehow, and with lots of resistance. But then it has its own merit, and it's not only radical and disruptive activism that it is its own value, but there are different. I think the responsibility of the designer is also understanding the entry point, and whereas what is the best approach. And of course, as well, I'm an academic, so sometimes I need to write journal articles, but on the other hand, when I engage with a community, I need to use another language. So as well, you need to know how different your roles need to be. And as well, I like that you talked about resistance, and of course, you need to face lots of resistance, but in the end, I think we build resilience. That's a critical part for activists. I was lucky enough, I think, because the Center for Sustainable Fashion, the director is Liz Williams, and is very supportive of this work. And as well, the head of college back then was Francis Corner, who's now we have a new head of college, but it is always been, they have been always very supportive of this type of work. Francis herself defined herself as an activist. But it is about using, having a cultural sensibility, I think, also to understand the people you work with and use the right approach. Even for my whole PhD was about embedding anthropology in service design and like working with craftspeople and activating change from within. But I think in my approach, I was trying to, as well, I had to reflect on my role, and I like your question about your role as a researcher. Actually, I always work with a bottom up, from the bottom up, with like communities that are always very overlooked. Artisans in the global south have been working with, but then at some point, I've always, when you always come and you do co-design, then there is also lots of, they are often very hopeless. They feel that nothing, the first reaction is that they want a grant for the government, and then they know that nothing will happen because it's too slow. And then my approach that I devised is, I call it middle up down, because I feel that my role as a designer has been bridging from the bottom up needs and aspirations of those communities, and then creating synergies or bridges with top-down support organizations, and in this case, it was with the local government. And I think that's a more resilient way of working, because as well, there is lots of work that other academics are doing in social innovation, but often those social innovations or grassroots innovations are not sustainable over time or financially sustainable. Whereas instead, if you can create links with other forms of organizations, it is more likely they will be sustainable. And I've always been very interested about the legacy of the project. So even if after the Borough Culture is finished, we are still engaged with the community and we are doing other work with them.
I think if something lives after the initial activism ends, then you feel that it's got its own energy. For me, just before I launched Fashion Roundtable, I actually ended up running a library campaign, which sounds like nothing, but my God, it was hard fought. It was light running. I've seen the level of engagement and obsession that I have in national politics for a local library. It hit every single nerve for people in communities, and the nastiness and the things we had to deal with was interesting, really interesting. So I think for me, whatever issue it is, whether it's national, global or local, you will meet people and you will need to find resilience, because you will meet resistance, and they will play themselves out in many different ways. For me, it's constantly been around identity, and for other people it will be different things. The irony for me was the library was actually there when my great-grandmother was born. It was built the same, and my great-grandmother lived down the road, but because of my surname, people have made assumptions, and actually my family are from down the road, half of them. So there was so much snobbery, because we've ended up in quite a nice area, but there's so many people who are in overcrowded social housing within the remit, and they were trying to sell it off. And I felt it was so immoral that instead of going with the local run friends group that had been going for whatever years, I set up my own one. we had the rival campaign, and in a way I think that's also what I did with Fashion Roundtable, is we set up a rival because I didn't think the conversation was strong enough. And I think sometimes that's something that all of us need to learn, is if you don't hear what you know needs to be said, you have to make space for a new conversation, because otherwise it's just the same old rubbish that's being spurted. And that's why for me with the SOL, I don't understand why other organisations haven't been fighting on it. I don't understand why these issues haven't been targeted as much as they should be, because other sectors are doing the work. And we make more money and we employ more people, and we need to stand up as an industry, I think, whether it's through climate, whether it's through local production, or whether it's through engaging with communities. Because surely as a college, I mean, UAL's not cheap to go to, right? So if you can't engage with those local communities on these local ways, many of these students won't be coming through the doors because of the price. So there's also consequences of the cost of university that is a big issue, and I think that's something that I hope that all of these colleges can do more of, especially because they were relying on foreign money that I don't think is going to be coming very soon. So, you know, it was something that has been worrying me all along. Well, what are you going to do for the local people in your local communities, because you can't, that money will stop. And look, COVID's shown, I would imagine the numbers of applications coming are down, right?
Yes, they are 30% or 20% down.
Right. And what about the EU numbers? Are they down?
Yeah, in general, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but overall, I think will be 70 or 80% of the whole of the numbers we had before. I don't remember. There is a breakdown between UK, EU, and international. But yeah, they're all.
I mean, I wouldn't be sending my child the other side of the world if it with a possible second wave. I don't know. I mean, you know, I know he's just gone off for a walk with my mother, but I mean, I adore him. You know, he'd go for an hour, but not for 2 years. Has anyone got any questions? Funding, work going on? Yep, Fiona's covered that. I don't think there's any questions coming through. I know that Francesco sent some links, which I put in the newsletter, and Sarah can just share. And we will also share those with the roundup at the end. But if anyone's got any points, I know actually she's gone, oh, she's back. If there's any points that anyone of our speakers wants to share before they go, please do, or forever hold your peace. Shameless plug, la la la. Yeah, I know about internships. That's a whole other conversation. And it's actually something that I want Jodie to pick up, because I personally have a slightly different opinion on it. And I want Jodie to be able to shape it. We've had lots of chats about this, Andrew, internally, because I have a different sense of it. Yes. So before we go, just a couple of minutes, Megan, do Holly and Bethany have any advice for current textile design students wanting to focus on more responsible, slow design? Quickly.
Students coming out, sorry, did you just say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so much like within the UK and Europe in processes and craftspeople that like industry can support. So yeah, I think like researching within the UK is a really good place to start. Yeah, like when I was on my MA, I was doing like projects with basket weaving in the UK and developing textiles like slowly and using like recycled materials. So yeah, I think it's like a really good place to start.
I think don't be afraid to ask, you know, and look outside, like Bethany's saying, outside the sort of normal parameters. So we rarely actually work with fabric suppliers. We work with clothing suppliers, you know, people make automotive parts, that kind of thing. So look beyond the expected, and you'll find that a lot of manufacturers are really willing to engage and enjoy the experience of working on something that's creative, that's different to their normal output. And as a student or a graduate, don't be afraid to ask. You don't ask, you don't get. You've got to put it out there. And people in the industry do have a lot more time than you expect to kind of engage with you and, you know, input and mentor. So I think, yeah, be forthright with what you're looking for and persistent.
Yeah, and I think also like people are more like have a bit more time at the moment as well. And you know, yeah, the worst answer anyone can give you is no. So yeah, and yeah.
Thank you. I make Bethany do public speaking, and I know it's not her first love, but she's very sweet to me and I adore her, so I really appreciate that. Before I come to Belle's question, I just want to qualify, Andrew, we are going to pick up on it, and it's something Jodie and I have been talking about. My thing around volunteerships is that I want to look at, so when I was younger, you could sign on and you could do internships and there was no issue with it, and now there is no real signing on and the rents are much higher. So my issues are access, and there's been lots of work about getting marginalised people from different backgrounds from out of London into internships into the BBC, and it's something that I want to look at, but I want to look at it more holistically because I think it's a really big issue. But I know that the sector is propped up by volunteers, but I think it's just something that I want to address in another workshop. But I think it's brilliant you're starting your campaign because everybody's getting more active, and I just think that's fantastic. You had a question, Belle, about different conflicting information. So for resources, where do you go, Belle, to get your information? It's hard, right?
I don't really need information like that, not quite like that anymore. I mean, I kind of I kind of know what I need to do. I would say there are a lot of very reliable or very admirable organizations like Fashion Revolution, but also the Clean Clothes campaign. What else is the big one? I always like to go back to the, oh my God, I've got a complete blank. You know, the committee that met on, that was headed up by Mary Creer, EAC.
The EAC, yeah, the EAC, yeah, they weren't going to put fashion on the agenda for this, I want to say this season, because I still speak fashion language. This Parliament, we lobbied them with one of our members and CSF, who also did lots of letters, and one of our members who's on here, I think Kate August, did a campaign, got 500 people to sign, and they are now, and also I lobbied internally, they are now looking at it again because they weren't going to.
Right.
That report was great, yeah.
Yes, so that was a fantastic, but it was quite a sort of, you know, a governmental report. We sort of, I don't know, I mean, it's out there. There are so many articles about sustainable fashion or recommending sustainable labels that you can turn to, and particularly now with the garment workers. I mean, certainly The Guardian, which I read, has got loads of information. One thing I would say, reading that question, is the consumer is not solely responsible for the change that we need. It has to be a mass movement push that involves all aspects of society. I'm not going to blame the consumer for the situation we're in, but certainly the rate of consumption is something that we have to address. And then this idea in the question, if they are to play a part in this bigger change, particularly in terms of those who perhaps don't have the time or financial means to change their habits easily, I have to say, since adopting the boycott, the amount of money I've spent on clothes has plummeted. I have gone into the backs of my wardrobe. There is not a single one of us who doesn't have unworn clothes in the back of their wardrobes. I've gone into the back of my wardrobes. I've learned to restyle myself. I've learned very tentatively to sew and try and mend. It's not expensive actually to live an ethical lifestyle. And when I did come out of boycott, the first thing I went to an ethical brand and bought myself a beautiful dress. As a thank you to myself, you know, but I went to an ethical brand, and yes, it was a little bit of money, but compared to what I'd saved in the year that had gone, it really wasn't a problem. Truly, I mean,
we're doing a webinar next Friday with Tansy Hoskins, who wrote about this topic, and I think she's brilliant. And she was on a panel I chaired for Lily Allen's thing pre-lockdown. So I think we'll cover that more on that conversation. And I think we've gone to quite a long time now, so probably everybody's fading. And I know Belle has to meet her daughter, and my son's gone off to the park post guitar class. But thank you, everyone. If you've got any questions for any of our speakers, please just send them to our admin email. And we can forward them on. And I just wanted to say thank you. And Bethany, thank you for being a brilliant public speaker for me. And Holly, and all that you're doing with the PP, it's very inspiring and it's much needed. And also to Francesco for fighting the fight, because for me personally, Brexit was and continues to be a massive identity issue. I think the future of our country is at stake, and I can't put it greater than that, because it ties in with so many of these other issues about who we want to be, how we want to do business, and what we are as communities. And so I think going into Waltham's Forest, which is not unlike where I grew up, and that where I grew up voted Leave massively and is being systematically dismantled, I think it's so needed. And I think it's to be celebrated that people are coming out of these so-called ivory towers to try and engage, because for none of us it's easy. I know that in different ways, but I think I really welcome Andrew doing his campaign and Kate doing her campaign, because more and more of us are finding our resilience. And if you want to learn about the Fabians, which is how I got into this, I can share the details, and they do fantastic resilience training if you are lucky enough to be accepted onto their scheme for women to get into politics. But have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the sunshine while it lasts. I think it lasts for a few more hours. Have a great weekend, and thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.